Sky News that Nadine Dorries, the health minister, has been confirmed as having coronavirus. That news in the last few minutes. We can also show you the front page of The Times. They are leading with that story today. You can see their headline there. Health minister with virus had been to number 10. And they're saying in their article that Nadine Dorries had met people in Parliament in the last week and also had attended a reception at number 10 with Boris Johnson. That's according to The Times. We're going to talk about that story as well as part of our press review, and we'll show you the other front pages in a moment. But just on this breaking news, let's introduce our guests, Ayesha Hazarika and Tom Newton-Dunn, just to get their reaction to this breaking news. And so Nadine Dorries, we're told by the Department of Health, has coronavirus.
Yeah, very big story. It perhaps is no surprise that people who might be in the public eye are beginning to contract the disease. It's going to spread pretty far and wide pretty quickly. But someone as central to not just the running of government as a reasonably senior health minister, but the running of the fight against the disease is more than ironic. Of course, she spent a fairly large amount of time both throughout the House of Commons. She started to feel ill while she was signing a statutory instrument about coronavirus, declaring it a very serious disease, which is another piece of horrendous irony. The night before that, which was last Thursday, she spent a reception in number 10 with the Prime Minister, celebrating International Women's Day. So this is someone who's been all around the corridors of power. And to make it any more different to anyone else catching coronavirus and coming into contact with anyone else. But it does therefore mean, potentially, there's a whole load of people inside the very heart of government now who now also need to think about self-isolating, including potentially the most extraordinary situation of all, the Prime Minister himself.
That's right. And so it is an extraordinary moment, isn't it? And you imagine that there is testing going on as we speak.
Yeah, we've been waiting for this moment, really. We haven't had like a very high-profile case, let alone at the heart of Westminster. As Tom was saying, when you're in Westminster, you are really up against people all the time. You're going to receptions. Of course, there was a big vote in the House of Commons today, the Huawei vote. So you've got these voting lobbies. Everybody is really squashed in with each other. So I think there's going to have to be a very, very serious conversation now, and people are going to have to be honest if they've had contact with Nadine Dorries, if they will have to go into self-isolation themselves. The problem with this illness is that you are contagious often at your peak level of contagion before you actually start displaying the symptoms yourself. So I think we need our politicians, and also not just politicians, officials at the Department of Health, anybody who may have come in contact with her is going to have to sort of really have a judgment call about whether to self-isolate. So this could be the beginning of the moment that we see this really affecting, the nuts and bolts of government and Parliament.
And of course, if she's been in contact with the Prime Minister, that could raise extraordinary issues for him.
Obviously for him, but also every other Department of Health minister. I mean, health ministers in the department, run by Matt Hancock, will be meeting every day, several times a day, and lots of them in close rooms. So, you've got technically, potentially, the entire top rung of the Department of Health now having certainly been very in close proximity to someone who's contracted coronavirus, or having been now incubating it themselves. It's absolutely extraordinary. We're basically trying to work this one through now as we speak, and the connotations are potentially quite extraordinary. Taking out the entire top tier of people battling this disease in one foul swoop is a most extraordinary term for this whole story to take. Now, of course, that may not happen. You may get to a situation where some people think, well, actually, if I abandon ship and the entire Department of Health abandons ship, then who else is going to be left to fight this? So the decision may be taken. We just have to press on and then try and isolate the department from everybody else. But this is a modern world. It's a modern government. These ministers have to go to Parliament to pass legislation. They've got to go to number 10. They've got to work all around Whitehall, and they've got to visit hospitals. And Nadine Dorries is not the first health minister globally to contract this. Several other health ministers, notably Iran's deputy health minister, who has very famous shots of sweating profusely live on television. So health ministers, health officials are in quite high risk because they come into a lot of contact with people, but it doesn't make it any less serious, the predicament that they now put everybody else in via no, foul means themselves.
Okay, well, let's get to the very latest. Sorry to just interrupt, but Joe Pike is standing by, our political correspondent, who's live at Westminster for us now. So, Joe, what's really really sorry to hear Nadine has tested positive for coronavirus. She's done the right thing by self-isolating at home, and both the NHS and PHE, that's Public Health England, staff have been brilliant. We all wish her well as she recovers. And Matt Hancock goes on to say, I understand why people are worried about this disease. We will do all we can to keep people safe based on the best possible science. So that, just in that statement from the Health Secretary Matt Hancock responding to the confirmation that Nadine Dorries, Health Minister, of course, has been diagnosed with coronavirus and is currently self-isolating at home. So it'll be really interesting, won't it, to see how the government now handles this. Their message all along has been we're in control, we're being calm, it's a serious situation, but we're properly prepared. So handling this news is going to be a challenge for them.
Well, it is, and I think there's the anxieties at some point, and you know, there's been a lot of talk about it. There will come a tipping point when cases will suddenly, you know, exponentially sort of go up. And, you know, the virus operates without fear or favour. It doesn't stop because of your government hierarchy or if you're reading the news or anything like that. And I think what's really interesting is a lot of workplaces have been frantically this week doing contingency planning, trying to see if they can still operate their businesses remotely, working from home. Newspapers are doing it, big businesses are doing it. And it will be interesting to see if the government themselves have actually put into place a proper, you know, full-scale emergency planning for this. I mean, Matt Hancock's statement that you just read out, yes, of course, we send our best wishes to Nadine Dorries, but what he didn't say there was, is he going to undergo testing now?
Well, I'm just thinking this through now as we speak. He's clearly not self-isolating. He took health questions in the House of Commons today, which was, it just happened to be his turn to stand in front of the whole of the House of Commons and answer questions for an hour at 11:30
Unless he's
today.
been tested already. Is that possible?
I suppose it is possible. It takes time to get the test results out. But if you know, think this one through, clearly Nadine Dorries would have raised the flag about this in the last few days. Unless it was this afternoon, which seems a little bit unlikely, it would appear both Matt Hancock and potentially the Prime Minister, we also know isn't self-isolating, have taken the decision, or someone's taken the decision for them, that either they're free or they're just simply too important to in the battle against all this, to take themselves out of play for 2 weeks. But then again, if that's the case, who are they spreading it to?
And of course, you mentioned a big vote today. Tomorrow's the budget.
Oh, absolutely.
Another very big day, and a lot of focus of that budget will be on coronavirus. I mean, Rishi Sunak has, they're talking about it being one of the most rewritten budgets ever because of so much has developed in the very short time he's been Chancellor. And once again, a very big group of people in the House of Commons.
Well, it's an extraordinary budget. I mean, when you really look at the history of this budget, remember, this budget was meant to be delivered by Sajid Javid. He left in pretty difficult circumstances. You've got a Treasury boss who's only been in the job for really less than a month. This was all about levelling up. This was meant to be about big infrastructure spending to honour the promises of the election. But actually, this is now going to be dominated by coronavirus. And we know that the OECD has said that the global slowdown could be up to about 0.2%. And if there is a kind of recession of some kind or a slowdown in this country, the government has to give some comfort to businesses that they will give them a bridge in terms of all the financial support they can. They may need to do some more fiscal stimulus to keep the economy fired up. The issue of sick pay for people who are self-isolating is a big question as well. How do you look after people who maybe are in the gig economy, self-employed? So Rishi Sunak is going to have to juggle, you know, two very, very big competing agendas. One is delivering on the election, but the other is the very immediate pressing drama of this coronavirus.
Well, that's right. And when one of their MPs has tested positive, just the symbolism of seeing her colleagues all together, hundreds of them, in the same chamber, is a tricky one at a time like this.
And the House of Commons chamber is never more packed than on budget day. Some MPs queue from 6 in the morning to get a seat. Others will pile in at the last minute. But the chamber is absolutely rammed, as it will be. And the chamber fits in about 300-400 MPs, you know, best, in terms of sitting down. On budget day itself, most of the 650 are in there.
People standing, sitting on the aisles.
They're hanging from the rafters, pretty much. And there's a lot of shouting going on, potentially a lot of spittle coming out of people's mouths.
A lot of hot air.
I think the atmosphere tomorrow will be really interesting, especially when the Chancellor starts addressing these sorts of measures. And what's interesting about this budget, pre-Nadine Dorries news, which has really changed the complexion of everything tonight, is that, as Isha was saying, obviously a huge amount of attention is now going to be on coronavirus. This entire budget has been very rapidly rewritten. Day by day, actually, as the more data comes in, the more the economists are able to work out what effect the spread might have on the economy. So Rishi Sunak has to take out all the stuff he wanted to do and put in more coronavirus fighting stuff. Credit lines to banks, help for people, the self-employed who won't be able to earn any money, all sorts of different things I think we'll see tomorrow. But what's really interesting is he's also doing a lot of that big infrastructure spending that Boris Johnson promised in the general election, the levelling up. £100 billion extra money going into roads, rail, housing, broadband, all sorts of different things tomorrow, taking the total infrastructure spending to £600 billion by the end of Parliament. It's record numbers. You might kind of think, well, can you really afford to do both at the same time?
Yeah.
Okay, we're going to have to take a break right there, but just to remind you of the breaking news before we go to the break, that the Health Minister, Nadine Dorries, has confirmed that she's tested positive for coronavirus. She informed she'd taken all the advice of them. It's on the front page of the Times, that story. The Daily Express, meanwhile, says we're ready. It's talking about the NHS, reporting 10,000 people a day will be able to be tested for coronavirus. The Metro reports that a number of high street banks will offer dispensations on mortgages and credit card debt in light of the virus crisis. The Daily Telegraph has the same good news for mortgage holders affected by the outbreak, reporting some banks will suspend payments for up to 3 months. Rishi Sunak's first budget as Chancellor leads the Financial Times with the suggestion that he'll be looking to signal the end of austerity by announcing a big increase in public borrowing. The Guardian calls it the coronavirus budget, with billions of pounds promised to ease the strain on the NHS. Budget billions to beat the virus is the headline on the Daily Mail, focusing on budget promises for Britain during the virus outbreak. The Eye previews tomorrow's budget as well, with news of a major boost to infrastructure spending and support for businesses. And the Mirror runs with a story on James Bulger's killer, John Venables, reporting the parole board is considering releasing him. So we only have a couple of minutes to chat through with Aisha Hazarika and Tom Newton-Dunn, but you wanted to focus on the Financial Times, because obviously a big day tomorrow with the budget.
So we left you on this brilliant cliffhanger before the break, which was Rishi Sunak is going to announce a massive increase in spending on infrastructure tomorrow, an extra £100 billion of the stuff, at the same time as producing a massive rescue package for the British economy, should it need it, and we probably imagine by now it probably will, because of the outbreak of coronavirus knocking out the workforce for several months this year. So how on earth is he going to pay for all that? Well, the FT has a stab at this. The answer is we don't know, but he is going to tell us tomorrow. You remember Sajid Javid resigned, his predecessor, less than 4 weeks ago, 3 weeks and 5 days ago, basically because of a row over how much the government should be borrowing. Number 10, Boris Johnson and Dominic Cummings, his chief aide, wanted to borrow more than they promised they'd borrow in the Tory election manifesto, because actually it turns out their plans are a lot bigger than they even thought then. Sajid Javid had a big problem with that. There was a row between their advisors. He resigned. Rishi Sunak is almost certainly going to expand those fiscal rules and borrow more. How he does that, we don't know. But interestingly, the FT have worked out that the package we know about already is bigger than anything we've seen since Norman Lamont's massively big budget to basically fund his way through a general election in 1992.
So really interesting how he wants to raise that money, and how it's spent is interesting as well, isn't it? Because obviously there's money for infrastructure, but now there will also presumably money to tackle coronavirus. So let's just take a look at the Telegraph as well, because they're also dealing with some of the relief for people who are suffering from the economic strains of coronavirus.
Yeah, most of the banks have this evening announced that they will offer people that have mortgages with them the chance to have some kind of relief, whether it's a holiday, whether it's deferring stuff. I mean, people will still have to pay, but they need to get in contact with their banks. But just one thing on the other side is that, yes, there will be some levelling up and there will be some money, but this is capital spend. Day-to-day spending is still very tight for a lot of government departments, including local government.
Thank you very much. preview, our first look at what's on the front pages as they arrive. Over the next half an hour, we're going to be talking about the headlines with the editor of The Londoner at the Evening Standard, Ayesha Hazarika, and The Sun's political editor, Tom Newton-Dunn. So good evening to you.
Good evening.
Hello. So let's take a look at what's making the front pages then. And The Times leads with the Health Minister, Nadine Dorries, being diagnosed with COVID-19. They say she met hundreds of people in Parliament over the past week. We're ready, says the Daily Express, referring to the NHS. The paper says tens of thousands can be tested for coronavirus every day. The Metro reports that a number of high street banks will offer dispensations on mortgages and credit card debt because of the virus crisis. And it's the same story for the Daily Telegraph. Some banks will suspend payments for up to 3 months. Rishi Sunak could signal the end of austerity by announcing a big increase in public borrowing in his first budget as Chancellor. That's according to the Financial Times. The Guardian calls it the coronavirus budget, with billions of pounds promised to ease the strain on the NHS. Budget billions to beat the virus is the Daily Mail's headline. The Eye has details of a major boost to infrastructure spending and more support for businesses. And the Mirror has a story about James Bulger's killer, John Venables, reporting that the parole board is considering releasing him. So Ayesha Hazarika and Tom Newton-Dunn here with me. A lot of the front pages either focusing on coronavirus or the budget or both, but the Times really has the kind of standout splash tomorrow, doesn't it? And the news that the Health Minister, Nadine Dorries, has been diagnosed with coronavirus, something that she's confirmed herself tonight.
Well, this is a really big moment in the sort of unfolding story of the coronavirus, and it's ironically the Health Minister, Nadine Dorries, who has been found to be positive. She's actually just tweeted saying that she's beginning to feel a bit better, but her elderly mother is staying with her and is getting tested tomorrow. So, of course, we send our best wishes to both of them,
yeah,
of course.
absolutely.
But it does really show you that this is a crisis which is really, no one is immune from it. You can be as high up in the land as you like, and this will, it's got the potential to affect everybody. Big questions now are being asked, though. When did she get tested? How long may she have been contagious for? Obviously, she's been in the House of Commons. MPs, are sort of very, very close together, voting in those lobbies where everyone is piling in the chamber. She's been working very, very closely with her health colleagues, the Prime Minister she will have been in contact with. So the big question now is, does anyone else at the top of government or in the health department need to self-isolate? And I think as well, people will be wanting to see how the government handle this, because lots of business leaders, and also if you're self-employed as well, lots of people will be taking their cues from our political leaders. And our political leaders, will be wanting to send a message to everybody saying, look, if you get ill, self-isolate. If you've been in contact with somebody that's been ill, self-isolate. But if they don't do it themselves, how is that going to make other people have confidence? So this is quite a key moment, and seeing how the government reacts to this in the next 24 hours is going to be really, really significant.
And awful for her, and awful for anyone that is diagnosed with this illness. But as Ayesha was saying, it does raise questions, given that she's part of a team that's trying to tackle this virus.
I mean, it's the most extraordinary irony that here you have one of the key people involved in this fight coming down with it herself. So I think there's a couple of points here. The first is that it should really be no surprise that coronavirus has hit Westminster and hit a government ministry. Terribly ironic, it happens to be the Department of Health, of all places. But sooner or later, coronavirus is going to come knocking at everybody's place of business. I think that much we now can all accept. And these are all human beings with 84-year-old mothers, as Nadine Dorries is tweeting as well. So I think it's hard to ascribe any blame at the moment, especially because you're at your most contagious when you have no idea of the symptoms you have. So we've all, in the space of the last half hour, worked out her voting record, because it's all now digitally available, and we've all discovered that she walked through a very busy House of Commons lobby with 327 other Tory MPs only last Wednesday for a particular vote in the House of Commons.
Well, before she had any symptoms, she said that she...
2 days before she had symptoms, because she first started getting the symptoms on Friday, but obviously when she was still potentially very contagious. Now, I've been busily messaging everyone I know, including a few ministers who might have had contact with her in the last sort of hour or so, as every other political journalist. And the advice they've got is quite interesting. So we know now that she only was tested positive for coronavirus quite late this afternoon, early this evening. So everybody who would have been in contact with her could have no idea that she had coronavirus, which includes the Health Secretary, Matt Hancock, who took health questions in the Commons today, the Prime Minister, Boris Johnson, who she was at a number 10 reception with last Thursday night, who of course went to Westminster Abbey to meet the Queen yesterday. So none of these people really can be blamed for any of this. The question is now, therefore, is the Prime Minister self-isolating, and is Matt Hancock self-isolating? Both would have had contact with her and considerable contact. The answer I'm told is no. And the reason for that is all directed by, health advice and advice to the practitioners, that you should only isolate for two reasons. One, if you're showing symptoms yourself, because you may not necessarily have the sort of contact with someone that would mean you really stood much of a chance of catching this. And two, and this is the important point, the contact tracers. So there's an amazingly large team of these brilliant people working up precisely where various people with the virus were, who they talked to, what close contact they had. And they can map out precisely the level of risk you might be in if you have that contact. It has already been decided, apparently, that both Matt Hancock, the Health Secretary, and the Prime Minister didn't have enough contact with Nadine Dorries to go into self-isolation.
That's interesting. And perhaps I should just read her statement tonight. You've mentioned her tweet that she's put out in the last 20 minutes or so, but she just said, I can confirm I've tested positive for coronavirus. As soon as I was informed, I took all the advised precautions and have been self-isolating at home. Public Health England has started detailed contact tracing, as you say, and the department and my parliamentary office are closely following their advice. I'd like to thank PHE, Public Health England, and the wonderful NHS staff who've provided me with advice and support. And we should move on because there are so many other issues around this virus as well. But just a quick thought that a lot of focus, of course, on the budget and what they might do for coronavirus. And there will be that moment when the House of Commons will be absolutely round to the gunnels with people who may well have been in contact with Nadine Dorries in the last week or so.
Oh, absolutely. I mean, look, there are very few moments that attract more MPs to the chamber than the budget. It really is like a big, big, big moment. And, the chamber will be absolutely packed. People will be sitting on the floor on the steps. People will be standing up. The press gallery will be jam-packed, the public gallery as well. So there's a lot of human beings crammed into a very, very small space. There is going to be, there are legitimate questions about gatherings of people at the moment. And of course, we look to Parliament to sort of set the standard. And I just think Nadine Dorries is not going to be the first politician that tests positive. I think we are going to see more
not the
and
last.
more. Oh yeah, sorry, the last. I think we're going to see more and more. I mean, I'm not saying that the budget shouldn't go ahead, it should do, but I think that the reality is, as Tom said, this is coming down the track. The experts are saying to us that in the next 10 days, things could get really, really, tough. And we do need strategies. We will be looking to our political leaders to see what they do. There'll be a lot of businesses saying, well, hang on a minute, if key people are being tested positive, other people are being in contact with them, but they're still coming to work, maybe it's all right for us as well. So we don't really know what we're doing with this, which is the truth.
And it'd be very interesting to see how it is handled. I'm going to bring in another paper just before you move on, if that's all
Final
right.
thing positive, that we
Yes,
must
go on.
remember, she's already recovering. So
Yes.
she came down with his symptoms heavily Friday, Saturday. It's now Tuesday night and she's in recovery. That in itself has to tell you that, right, this thing, for most of us, although there'll be some very horrible critical cases, we know that already, but for most of us, we're probably going to get through this thing in 4 or 5 days.
Yeah, she says in her tweet, it's been pretty rubbish, but I hope I'm over the worst of it now. And she reminds everyone to keep washing their hands. I will move on to The Guardian, but it's on the same kind of area. They talk about the coronavirus budget there. And this budget has had to be rewritten several times, presumably, in the short time that Rishi Sunak has been Chancellor.
Well, yeah, I mean, the whole story of this budget is extraordinary. Sajid Javid, I mean, this was the budget that Sajid Javid, this was going to be the budget of his lifetime, his chance to do it, but he's not around. The reason he left, huge bust-up with Number 10 about how much money wanted to be spent. And Rishi Sunak will have been working very closely with Number 10 to basically honour those pre-election promises of an end to austerity. Whether that is the truth, we'll have to wait and see. Turning on the spending taps. But now, of course, you have coronavirus, which is coming along. So this budget is really two budgets. There is the infrastructure splurge. Well, let's see if it's a splurge in real terms. But I think that will be more dominated by the coronavirus budget because the OECD says there could be a global slowdown of around 0.2%. So that's going to hit economies. So what the Chancellor will want to do is kind of try and ride two horses. Yes, show those red wall voters that they do care about things like infrastructure, but they're going to have to shore up the economy. They're going to have to give a bridge to businesses that are worried about how to cope with this, and also, a bit of stimulus to fire up the economy if we do have a dip.
Well, yeah, so support for businesses obviously will be important. A quick look at the front of the Telegraph, individuals as well, and the Telegraph is suggesting that, well, they're reflecting the fact that banks have already, some of them at least, have said that they will give people holidays from their mortgages to try to help individuals.
Yeah, and I think we're going to see quite a lot more from the Chancellor about this already tomorrow. So RBS is the bank that said this today. They're largely state-owned. I don't think it's any surprise at all that they're the first ones to come out of this. They may have a very good idea of what the Chancellor says tomorrow. I'm told that a lot of people with mortgage worries will feel a lot more comfortable after the end of his statement. Credit lines also for small businesses who are struggling to make ends meet if their revenue collapses because of coronavirus. And also the self-employed who aren't simply getting any income anymore, they'll have some money, a credit line for the government will open up for them. So an enormous amount of money the Chancellor is potentially putting himself on the hook for, because we don't know the effect this is going to have on the economy. And I'm told as the days go on, more data comes in for the economists. The Chancellor has to reassess everything, and the budget's been changing almost hour by hour. He rips stuff out that he can't do anymore because all that fiscal firepower may have to be spent on coronavirus. It's an absolutely unprecedented, it's a peacetime kind of budget. This is a wartime budget where you're reacting to incredibly dramatic events sort of day by day, not the sort of careful long-term planning that chancellors really want to do.
And we're going to have more analysis of that budget and what it might include. Could be some good news for motorists, according to your paper, The Sun. We're going to be talking about that in just a moment.
Ats has opened.
Welcome back. You're watching the press preview. With me tonight, Hazarika and Tom Newton-Dunn. And we're going to turn to the front page of the Financial Times because we've touched on the budget and talked about how coronavirus might be affected by it. But what about the rest of it?
Well, I suppose one of the surprises with coronavirus being such a massive subject now and such a huge problem for the Chancellor of the Exchequer to address tomorrow, with the potentially huge amounts of financial firepower he's going to have to keep in reserve, you then flip the question and say, well, why would he want to do anything else? The answer is Boris Johnson's government just got elected off the back of a substantial manifesto packed full of promises on health spending, on police spending, and especially levelling up spending. In other words, the left behind areas, the towns in the north, the Midlands, who didn't get all the money that the South East got, they wanted to spend a lot more money on those. And lo and behold, they're going to tomorrow. They're going to spend an extra £100 billion, taking total infrastructure spending to £600 billion by the end of the Parliament, which is an enormous amount of money, at the same time as building this great big war chest to deal with coronavirus. How on earth can you do both, you might wonder? Is there money to do both, you might wonder? The answer is almost certainly not, which is why the FT say he's going to borrow more and more and more. And we had a very good idea this was coming, because that's basically why Sajid Javid resigned. He didn't want to borrow more, didn't want to break the government's own rules they only set 2 or 3 months ago. They will do that tomorrow, and we'll find out exactly how much when Rishi Sunak stands up just after 12:30.
I think the other thing that's going to be interesting is Labour's response, because it's the leader of the opposition that responds to this. So this will be one of Jeremy Corbyn's last big out. as leader of the party, and I think what he will say is, look, hang on a minute, a lot of this infrastructure spending is stuff, and extra borrowing when interest rates are low is something that actually we've advocated. And I think what's very important with the budget, the headlines we're getting today and the headlines immediately out of the budget could be quite positive, but often with budgets things unravel a few days later, famously the pasty tax and things like that. So I think the thing to watch for in this is what is actually the black and white final spending going to be, and even though we're talking about long-term capital investment, day-to-day spending is still pretty tough for a lot of departments, particularly local government as well. So it doesn't mean that somehow magically overnight people are going to suddenly feel real relief. Remember, there's things like social care, which is really squeezed, could even get worse with the coronavirus as well. So I think we just need to like not get too sort of wrapped up in all the hey, this is all going to be
There's
great
a tiny bit
news.
of good news.
very
just
quick
before we
briefly.
go, which is the Chancellor is going to
Sinasan,
freeze fuel duty. It won't go up by 2p a litre. We reveal that tomorrow. So in all the sea of misery, at least you won't be paying any more to fill up.
And we've managed to end on your piece there.
By total coincidence.
Totally
Amazing.
Anyway, yes.
Amazing.
And we are out of time with that. But Tom and Aisha, thanks very much indeed. Good to see you both.
Which is really squeezed. Often with budgets, things unravel a few days. I think
Enormous amount of money. At the same time as building this great big war chest to deal with coronavirus. How on earth can you do both? North, the Midlands, who didn't get all the money that the South East got.
We've touched on the budget and talked about how coronavirus might be affected by it, but what about the rest of it?
Well, I suppose one of the surprises with coronavirus being such a massive subject now and such a huge problem for the Chancellor of the Exchequer to address tomorrow, with the potentially huge amounts of financial firepower he's going to have to keep in reserve, you then flip the question and say, well, why would he want to do anything else? The answer is Boris Johnson's government, they just got elected off the back of a substantial manifesto packed full of promises on health spending, on police spending, and especially levelling up spending. In other words, the left behind areas, the towns in the north, the Midlands, who didn't get all the money that the South East got, they wanted to spend a lot more money on those. And lo and behold, they're going to tomorrow. They're going to spend an extra £100 billion, taking total infrastructure spending to £600 billion by the end of the Parliament, which is an enormous amount of money. At the same time as building this great big war chest to deal with coronavirus. How on earth can you do both, you might wonder? Is there money to do both, you might wonder? The answer is almost certainly not, which is why the FT say he's going to borrow more and more. And we had a very good idea this was coming, because that's basically why Sajid Javid resigned. He didn't want to borrow more, didn't want to break the government's own rules they only set 2 or 3 months ago. They will do that tomorrow, and we'll find out exactly how much when Rishi Sunak stands up just after 12:30.
I think the other thing that's going to be interesting is Labour's response, because it's the leader of the opposition that responds to this. So this will be one of Jeremy Corbyn's last big outings as leader of the party. And I think what he will say is, look, hang on a minute, a lot of this infrastructure spending is stuff, and extra borrowing when interest rates are low is something that actually we've advocated. And I think what's very important with the budget, the headlines we're getting today and the headlines immediately out of the budget could be quite positive, but often with budgets things unravel a few days later, famously the pasty tax and things like that. So I think the thing to watch for in this is what is actually the black and white final spending going to be, and even though we're talking about long-term capital investment, day-to-day spending is still pretty tough for a lot of departments, particularly local government as well. So it doesn't mean that somehow magically overnight people are going to suddenly feel real relief. Remember, there's things like social care, which is really squeezed, could even get worse with the coronavirus as well. So I think we just need to like not get too sort of wrapped up in all the hey, this is all going to be
But there's
great
a tiny
news.
bit
Yeah,
of good news
very
just
quick
before we
briefly.
go, which is The Chancellor is going to freeze
Sinasan,
fuel duty. It won't
you're-
go up by 2p a litre. We reveal that tomorrow. So in all the sea of misery, at least you won't be paying any more to fill up.
And we've managed to end on your piece there.
By total coincidence.
Totally
Amazing.
Yes.
Amazing.
And we are out of time with that. But Tom and Aisha, thanks very much indeed. Good to see you both. Thank you.
Thank you.
Coming up next here on Sky News, COVID-19 comes to Westminster. The Health Minister, Nadine Dorries, tests positive and is self-isolating at home.